All right, hi everybody. How you doing? Welcome to Python, and specifically to, well, this is Py and Vim. The talk is called Developing with Python and Vim, and it's an introduction to using Python inside of Vim, not specifically using Vim to develop Python. A little bit about me. My name is Jerry Meeker. My email is jerry@meeker.net without the last E. My Git repositories are also in the same place, which is where you will find these slides. Which is important because I have 60 slides and not very much time to go over them. So they're pretty comprehensive. It's worth taking a look at, and there's code examples inside it. And I've been using Python for quite a few years, Bash even longer. I've been using Linux on and off for over 12 years now. So what is Vim? A little satirical. It's an advanced text editor. There's a wide array of plugins. Scripting language, Vim Script, it's very cool. It's kind of like Bash, and a lot of people are afraid of it. And it supports scripting through Python, Ruby, and Lua. And NeoVim's looking to do more of a universal API. And Python, that's what we're here for. I just put other text editors people use. Specifically, Emacs is up there. It says Evil. Evil's a mode to use Vim-like bindings inside of Emacs. And then just other ones. WQ, it's usually the first command everybody learns. A lot of people don't know how to exit Vim when they first start using it. If you hit Control-C, it actually tells you how to exit Vim. And Control-C is usually how you exit out of terminal programs. So a big part of my talk is inspired by Steve Losh. He wrote Learn Vim Script the Hard Way, and he also has a quote that I really enjoy. Getting something that works most of the time and getting back to coding is usually better than spending hours getting 100% perfect. I like that. It's kind of like the hacker mindset. You want to keep on building things rather than spending the rest of your life trying to fix the rough edges, as long as it works for you. So the first start is you need to create a VimRC. A lot of people say to set no compatibility mode. When you create a VimRC, it actually turns that off, or it turns it on. If you don't have a VimRC, it's in VI compatible mode. That's the Linux Unix way to do it. You make a directory and then you put set new in it. It shows lines on the side, kind of like, yeah, just like that. If you could see that. I actually find it very difficult to use Vim without it because you're using the numbers for the commands. So probably more important than going through the first part of my slides is the concepts. You have buffers, splits, and modes. So we'll get back to that in a second. The basic key bindings, HJKL, that's how you move left, right, up, down. WEB is how you move words forward to the end of a word and back a word. F binds in the line. G and GG goes to either the top or the bottom. And you search with slash or question mark, which is reverse search. That does the last insert command. So the modes, you have normal, insert, and visual. The most important mode is probably normal mode, other than insert in your text. You're editing your text. That's what it is. It's a text editor, not a text writer. And visual mode's pretty good too, because you get to select your text and move it all around. And actually, can I get a show of hands of how many people know Vim, or at least well enough? Okay, that's good. So we'll get to the more interesting stuff in a bit. Yeah, so splits. You're splitting windows on a buffer. Mostly just so that you get multiple panes, work on multiple text files at once, and you're using that with the Windows, so you can also handle the splits. I have a quick fix and location here. I'm not going to go much over it. Pretty much that's where your linters go and your make commands go. I have a review. We'll review later. So let's get to the more important stuff. Vim Script. With Vim Script, I mean the most basic thing to do is hello world. You echo hello Pygotham, and that's also how you make a comment, double quotations. And if you echo M, actually that should be echo M in the down there. But then you go to your messages, it actually records it in your messages. The regular echo command will not save it in your messages. Then you create variables. I guess like Haskell syntax, use let x equal my variable. Now you have a variable x that you could call. If you put b colon in front of your variable, that variable is local only to that buffer. If you go to another buffer and you try to call b of x, it's not going to find it because it doesn't exist in that buffer. You also have global variables. It's a global scope. You could call it wherever you want. So we already have, we kind of went over set number a little bit. Have numbers on the side. You could set only to the local buffer using set local. And if you put a reference in front of it as a variable command, let reference new equals 0, you're turning off numbers because it's referencing it like if you're using set and u. Let's see. And I actually have a cute little script down there that you could set the title string of Vim so that your window manager would pick it up. It works on my desktop, but not on this laptop for some reason. So to toggle your events, like your number command, you just throw a bang after it. So bang on, bang off, just switches it. Then there's more advanced bindings you could use. Marks are specifically important in some situations, like if you're recording a macro, what you're doing is you're saying, this is where I'm starting, this is where I'm going, and then you type either backtick to go back to that, or a single quote to go back to the beginning of the line, so you remember in places you've been before. To record a macro, q at, or you're doing q and then you're using an alphanumeric key, and then you're using at to recall that macro. So it's pretty much you're just typing movements, inserts, everything you do normally except you're replaying it back. Registers are where you save pretty much everything. You could recall your macros from the registers. So we went over marks, macros, and registers. I like to use registers sometimes as variables themselves. I found that in some situations I can't expand my variables as easily in Vim Script, where if I just replay it as a register value, it'll replay. Or it'll work for that specific script where a variable will not. Some of the registers are more important than the others. My favorite one is specifically using the at, which I don't hear, which I think is the last command. Or no, using the double quotes, because using the double quote register, you can easily write your Vim script, yank it, call it back in command mode, and then that function exists in Vim itself. So then you could just call the function every time you want to use it. System clipboard is also pretty important, but you have to have it compiled into your Vim version. Maps, basic key bindings. You save maps depending on the type of mode you're in. Normal, insert, visual. You also get a little more interesting. You could do both. You could do neither. And that's a little example of how you can map K and J. To escape, it's pretty common. Sometimes escape's also J or K. I find that if I want to type just kidding, then I'm escaping. Let's see. Just more in key bindings. So the real meat and grits, one of those sayings is using external commands to get information, you know? Because Vim is one of those Unix kind of programs where you're piping things into it, you're getting information, and you're handling the context of multiple programs at once. So, for instance, if I'm in this buffer up here, if you can see that, and I want to get the date, I could just :R for read, and then I could do bang date. I'll go back to the Linux date command. I'll put a date right up there for me. Kind of neat. Other ways to do it is actually with visual select. I think always goes into insert mode. You could save the output of a command as a variable. So let command standard out equal a system command. And it also records standard error too. So if you want to use some kind of program that happens to throw a lot of debug information, like Zenity and GNOME programs have been doing for me, you throw the standard out into dev null, and then you get only you throw standard error into dev null, and you only get standard out recorded into your script. And the neat thing to do is, I always used to call a Python command by using a bang command. I think I have a hello world somewhere. And it says hello PyGotham. And that was how I would run a Python command. But I could also do pyfile instead, and hi.py, and it says it on the bottom, which is kind of neat, because then you don't have to escape from Vim currently running. But you know, you want to use Vim internally, or you want to use Python internally. Unfortunately, you can't use sysstandin or get raw input or input. I guess it's not that unfortunate, but if you try, you'll crash Vim, or you'll run into a halt. But you know, if you do py for py, you could just do Python commands like hello world, and you know, it's similar to using Python in -C mode, just single lines. You can run multiple commands separated by a delimiter of semicolon. So Vim script functions are good for Vim script, and they're good for Python too, because then you could write more extensive Python scripts inside of a Vim function and call that inside of Vim, and then you run into having fun passing variables back and forth from Vim to Python and then back to Vim. Fun. Lots of fun. So I guess I guess it's not super out of order. I wrote this presentation with Cleaver. I believe it's a Node.js program. So what it does is it takes a Markdown file, and then it just parses it and makes an HTML file out of it. Really neat, because then I get to use Markdown and do nothing. I have a nice presentation, right? So I'm doing this all in Vim, typing my Markdown. But I want to parse it every time I do something. I save it, and then I want to parse it. I write a Vim function for it, function with a bang. The bang means to just overwrite whatever's there already. So then silent execute. Silent means it doesn't go back to the terminal for that split second and say, click enter to continue. And then I just run execute, which means execute, obviously. And as the bang there, so runs. The bang is to run the external program, which runs the Cleaver program, which I have in some node folder. And then I run Firefox after that. So then I could load my, my HTML file in Firefox, click F5, see it looks nice. And execute redraws, because sometimes using silent messes up your screen. So it redraws the screen for you. And instead of calling Cleaver every time, you map it to command, no remap. So it doesn't remap any other keys. Buffer, because I was using it only in that local buffer. Usually I save my C command to a color for a Zenity. So if I'm doing HTML or something, I could bring up a color wheel, click on it, and then it prints that color for me, so I don't have to remember hex values. So it just calls Cleaver. CR for control return or carriage return. So a Python code block, which is kind of what we're here for, right? So if you've ever run the command cat in a Unix system, it concatenates things. If you run it kind of like cat less than EOF, you could write a file and then type EOF, and you could also redirect it and save it as a file. So you're kind of doing that with Python too. You're doing less EOF for end of file, and then at EOF, that's when Python stops. So that's just a basic boilerplate. Yeah. So underneath that, as you can see, just basic Python there. That's Python, just wrapped inside of a Vim script function. So Vim script's kind of cool, right? But there's some peculiarities between running Vim script and Python. To get the current line in Vim script, you get current or get line. Well, I guess you do the same thing in Python, but it's delimited by vim.current.line. So I have import Vim down there, and that's important to remember because supposedly you always need it. But I think one of my plugins already imports Vim, so I never think to do it. I never worry about it. You import it once, it's there forever, unless you decide to unload it for whatever reason. So I decided to call this mix script for whatever reason, because it's mix in Python and Vim script. So I defined cline, I guess for cline, for current line. And I'm using vim.eval, evaluating whatever the Vim script get line is doing. It's literally passing that into G as a Python variable. And then it's just returning it, reaper G, lstrip. So it's returning that, and then I'm calling vim.command still in Python. I'm returning that as a Vim command, the function itself. I didn't look too much into this, but I realized after I did it a couple times and I started calling it on the function, it was breaking on certain characters that should have been escaped, and it was also possibly trying to run a Vim script, but I didn't look too much into it. So there's probably a better way to escape it. I figured 10 minutes of my time was worth it for this talk. So that's what I just did. All right. So arguments. Arguments in Vim script, you have the 1, you have the 2. And then you call them as A for argument 1, A:2. And that's it. In Python, the way you get those arguments is the same way. You just Vim eval them. You're evaluating the arguments that are passed into the Vim script. To get the current word, use brackets C word, which is actually important. I'm not using it to delimit that this is where you put a current word. That's the actual command. So Python script, let's see. So the difference between this one is I'm pretty much doing the same thing. I'm creating local buffer variables, my word and my upper word. And it's expanding the current word and the upper current word. The difference, if you are familiar with Vim, which you seem to be, if you do W, it goes to the end of the word. If you do W and it's like a hyphenated word, it goes to the end of the hyphenated word. There's some grammatical differences, but that's the difference with the upper word and the lower word. So I did current line, apparently, I did current word. So my line, vim.current line, that's how you get the current line. To replace a current line, you're replacing the actual object itself. Inside of the vim.current line object is the current line. When you say, oh, now I want the current line to equal something else, you're replacing that line itself. How am I doing on time, by the way?
We have a break after, so go ahead. The break is finished back 5 minutes. So you have like 5 minutes.
I have like 5 minutes.
In a minute, you'll have 5 minutes.
In a minute, I'll have 5 minutes. All right. I'll skip some of this stuff on. So Vim objects pretty much work in a couple different ways. You have pretty much the same thing as being on the slides. You have buffers, you have windows. You can work on all those objects. You can work on lists. You can work on dictionaries, which are either Python objects or Vim script objects. If you do Vim .L list, it's using that list as a Vim script object. So it could be converted back to Vim script, so you could pass it back and forth. You can also work on ranges. Okay, so I think what I was doing in this one, because I'm kind of not reading the first one, from one of the only talk that's actually on Vim and Python, in the wiki for his Python Vim functions, he has vim.current.buffer.mark, and that was actually the first time I saw it. It's really useful. The less than grabs the first place of your last visual highlight. The greater than is the last place of the end of your last visual highlight. So you could play around with blocks like that, and then you could just throw it in a range or in a for loop, get all the objects that are stored inside of it. I have a script to reverse words. People seem to build calculators and show that as their examples. That was going to be my example. I figured I'll do something different. So it's just all Python in this one too, right? You're taking the current line, and you're taking the window cursor, and then you're enumerating over it. You're taking the line, and you're just doing the : -1 reverses the word, and you're just throwing it out into, or you're appending it to the buffer under the line you're currently at, which is why you got the cursor position, so you knew which line you were on. So I also wrote another function to make an ASCII square. I don't know why I like making shapes whenever I do some kind of developing language that gives me control of something. So I'm just taking arguments. And actually, the ellipsis up top, like in other programming languages, means you could give an arbitrary amount of arguments. So the A0 position is the first position that tells you the number of arguments you're passing into the Vim script function. The A1 is the only one I really care about because I'm just passing in the width of my square. Otherwise, I say the width is 20. An arbitrary number, I decided. I decided to make it an octothorpe because, Python, that's how we comment. And I just make a first line and the last line. So I have two static lines. And then I just iterate the first and last positions of the next lines, make a square. The list and dictionaries. So to pass the list and the dictionaries as Vim objects that you're creating in Python, see pyl equals vim.list. You're creating a list there. To pass it back into Python, you're calling pyeval. And you're echoing pyeval either the function or the Vim object itself that you saved. So L or D, so you have pyl equals to do. And just passing a list from Python back into Vim script. I haven't used list in Vim script other than very basic examples, but so be it. So towards the end of this presentation, 1 minute from the end of my presentation, I was going to go over how you manage plugins because this talk was originally going to be writing a plugin itself. So I decided, let's talk about the two main ones that I know of are Pathogen and Vundle. I use Vundle, so that's why I talk about it on this slide. This is what setting up Vundle looks like in your vimRC. Notice on the bottom, if you did write your own plugin, you could just call it from a Git directory. Vundle handles it, installs it, Git clones. And then NeoVim is also kind of cool, right? Because you don't have to be inside of NeoVim to use the REPL. You could just import NeoVim into IPython or something, and all the commands we just previously did, you could use in NeoVim. It works on your current open session, and as you can see, you could save the listen address as a global variable, so you could just put that in your bash RC or what have you. And I have a section of miscellaneous useful things. Nothing too important. So Steve Loesch learned Vim script the hard way, most awesome way, and Jared Taylor. That's Python and Vim. Thank you.